I work in human resources in a highly regulated industry. I support 12 different departments managed by 5 different directors. Onboarding an employee, from start to finish, takes me about 2.5 hours. If people complete the steps as outlined, I can do it a little bit at a time, e.g. complete the application and I can run your initial background checks. Complete tax and employment paperwork, I can get the payroll shell set up. Get your doctor to sign off on your medical form and I can do an evaluation of your fitness for work, and the final steps can be done in 10 minutes. Most directors understand this and encourage their applicants to get everything to me and respond to things in a timely manner. One director, John, has never grasped this concept. If his employees aren't ready to start, he calls me. If someone didn't complete their paperwork, he calls me. If someone says they did everything to start, he calls me. Typical conversation. John, what's holding up Bob Smith for the Synergy team? Me, it looks like he never sent in his license or filled out the I-9. What did he say when you spoke to him? John, I haven't spoken to him. That's why I'm calling you. He needs to start, this is a priority, please follow up with him. As you may have inferred, onboarding is one part of my job. I have a lot of other duties, but when someone is ready to go, I make sure that they get done as soon as possible. With John, however, no matter where someone is in the process, it's priority 1 rush. There is no phrase that can make me instantly angry like priority 1 rush, because it's lost all meaning for me. John and I share the same boss, Paul, and Paul had repeatedly told John that he is not to harass me. He needs to understand I have other departments to support, and that by demanding everything take top priority, including files that are nowhere near completion, he's taking away from actual priorities. John has promised to stop, but then goes back to it a week later saying, but we need him to start. It has to be a priority. Many of these take the form of emails at 4:58 p.m. saying, George is all set to start. I've told him that he can come in at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Please make sure all of his accounts and equipment are ready for him. This is a priority 1 rush and must be completed. So after the last stunt, I told my boss what I'd love to do. He, surprisingly, told me to go ahead and he'd be fine with it. The other day I had a new employee send me his medical file at 2 p.m. He was to work in one of our labs on a project. I was in the middle of review when another applicant emailed that he had finished his paperwork and CC'd John. This individual was to work in the office in a clerical job. Before I could even respond, John replied to all and included 2 other directors saying that the man would be starting tomorrow to get all of his accounts set up, and that this was priority 1. I replied to John, CC'd my boss, and told him I'd make it priority 1. So I immediately stopped working on the scientist's file and began reviewing the clerical employee's file. It was clear that he did not have everything he needed to start, and I was about to send an email telling him as much when another email came in informing me that another applicant for one of our lab teams, a technician, had filled out his I-9. My phone rang and it was John. You can guess where this is going. Sean, the manager, needs this person to start tomorrow. It's critical priority 1 that this person have everything set for tomorrow. I asked him to please send me an email, followed the same protocol as before, dropped the clerical file without another word, and moved on to the technician. As I was in the middle of doing the checks for the technician, the front desk called to say that one of our new hires, a custodian, was having trouble completing the application and that he'd like to have someone sit with him and help him. Knowing how this would play out, I suggested that she call John. Not even a minute late, John was on the phone with me telling me how urgent it was that this person start immediately, how it was my responsibility to provide this support, and how this should be treated as priority 1 rush. I apologized to John, told him I hadn't realized the urgency and said I would sit with the gentleman and help him. That's exactly what I did. I sat down with him, walked him through everything, and we submitted the application together. Though, as he had no physician's clearance, he was nowhere near being close to able to start. By that point it was 5:15 p.m. I sent an email to John letting him know that I had assisted the new hire one-on-one as per his instructions of priority 1 rush and CC'd our boss on it. The next day my phone began blowing up. A scientist showed up at the lab and there was no equipment for him and they didn't know he was coming. A clerical employee had no accounts and no access to the file rooms. A technician was not set up in the system, and none of them existed as an employee with clearance. In every case my response was the same, my apologies. I was in the middle of processing the file when John demanded I drop it to address a much more important matter. Let me transfer you to him. John showed up at my office screaming and demanding to know why things weren't done. I looked at him surprised and told him that I was following his instructions, and if something was a priority one rush then it took precedence over everything else. He asked if I seriously thought that helping the custodian fill out his application took priority over getting equipment for a new scientist on a time-critical project. I replied, honestly, no. It seemed like a pretty bad decision, but when you said it was a priority, I trusted your judgment and your decision, figuring you knew something I didn't. He called me a moron and walked away. I later found out that he demanded my termination for the stunt. My boss told him that I had done exactly what he asked and that the blame was entirely on him. He told him he could either trust my judgment to prioritize what needs to get done, or he could deal with the consequences of me following his instructions. Privately, my boss asked me not to do it again because his boss was furious over the whole thing and he had to admit he sanctioned it to stop my head from rolling. I'd like to say it stopped, but priority one rush is still one of John's favorite expressions, though thankfully it's been coming up much less frequently.